Welcome to the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. I'm Ryan Aber from the Oklahoman, joined by Jason Kersey, the OU beat writer. Jason, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic.
Off season, not a whole lot going on outside of the NFL draft and some recruiting stuff. First thing we got to touch on is the NFL draft last week. 4 Oklahoma Sooners taken, led by Jalen Saunders in the 4th round. What do you think overall about how the draft shaped out for Oklahoma?
Well, I thought I actually thought it went pretty well near the end. I thought they finished strong. It was a little bit interesting. After the 4th round, you sort of wondered whether any other players were going to get taken because I sat there the entire day in front of the TV watching the last 4 rounds of the draft. And, you know, after Aaron Colvin went to the Jaguars, you go through the 5th, you go through the 6th. They went through most of the 7th, and I thought, well, this is probably it, and there's going to be a bunch of free agents. And then Corey Nelson goes, and I was really surprised by that because nothing that I had seen suggested that he was going to get drafted. But it's a guy that I'm happy for. He's a good guy, and I think he deserves the opportunity with the Broncos. But and then Trey Millard went only a couple of picks later. I was really surprised, though, that Gabe Ikard didn't get picked.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest surprise to me is that Nelson got picked, Ikard didn't get picked. We'll stick with the guys who got drafted right now. First of all, Jalen Saunders. He's a guy that a lot of boards didn't have getting drafted at all. You were really high on for a long time, said that he would likely be the first one drafted a couple months ago before OU's Pro Day. How do you think Jalen Saunders fits in the NFL, and why did the Jets feel the need to pull the trigger in the 4th round?
Well, I think he's just a unique talent. He's not a big guy, but he's a playmaker and he's fast, and he brings a huge value on special teams as a punt returner. And I think that's something that probably boosted him up on some draft boards. I think the fact that he came to OU, made an impact immediately, was probably the best playmaker on the offense the last couple of years, I would say, once he got eligible. I mean, if you take just the games he was eligible in 2012, he was the leading receiver on the team. So he made a huge impact at Oklahoma. And so I think that the Jets went and they found a way to get Geno Smith, a playmaker, a receiver. And I think that's going to be good for them.
And he can also do other things other than just make plays out there. He's also been talked of very highly with the way he blocks and the way he goes about things. And that maybe strengthens his impact at the next level.
Yeah, that's the other thing is that, despite his size, he is a good blocker. He really, you could watch a lot of the runs OU made last year and even the year before, and he was out there making good blocks. So definitely, I think that plays into his selection.
And all of the other 3 draft picks for OU, Aaron Colvin, Corey Nelson, Trey Millard, had injury issues last year. Colvin was banged up through the year, fought through it, and was able to have a great senior year, but then tore his ACL at the Senior Bowl. Wasn't able to go in that, but Jaguars coaches said, hey, we're going to come get you. And he didn't hear from him after that much, but they certainly did on draft day. And I think a lot of people were surprised that he went in the 4th round. Would have been a second, probably a 2nd or 3rd round guy had he not got hurt. Certainly that hurt him. But still, I think a lot of people are talking about Colvin as maybe a steal in this draft.
Yeah, definitely. And I even think that there's a chance that if he'd been able to go through the whole draft lead up fully healthy, he maybe could have snuck into the 1st round. I think he's that good of a player. It was interesting listening to him talk about how the Jaguars had told him, we're going to come get you, and then they wound up doing it. I thought that was pretty interesting. And that just kind of says, I think, that people were really high on him, and he was starting to maybe develop a little bit of buzz before that injury that really couldn't have come at a worse time.
Yeah, had a fantastic Senior Bowl week leading up to the injury. Jacksonville Jaguars coaches were the coaching staff at the Senior Bowl who were working with him, and obviously that made a huge impression on them.
Yeah, definitely. And, he's probably going to have to start the year maybe on the PUP list. He's by training camp, I think they want him to be able to go through some things. He's still probably not going to be cleared for contact, so it might take several games into his rookie season before he's actually able to play. But once he is, I think that he is a guy who could have an impact because he's a cornerback but he's also played safety at OU. So I think that says to a lot of people that he's a physical player. He's not afraid to go up and hit people. He was OU's leading tackler his sophomore season. So I think there's a lot of things that he can do and do well, and I think that the Jaguars recognize that.
Yeah, I think for me, if I was the Jaguars, I would just treat this as a redshirt season, let him get healthy, get through some practices, but really focus on the next year, 2015, to come in and have an impact. And I think he can have a quick impact once he gets back on the field. He had, like you said, a fantastic season. We watched what he did in that K-State game with as banged up as he was, to be able to slow down Lockett and really turn that game around in the second half.
Yeah, I think I said this last week on the podcast that you could argue was one of the most pivotal performances of the season, because if he doesn't come in and lock it down the way he did, OU may not win that game, and if they don't win that game, they certainly don't go to the Sugar Bowl and beat Alabama.
Absolutely. And then we wait until the seventh round. Corey Nelson goes. He had a torn pec muscle midway through the season. He was having a fantastic season as well before his injury. A couple picks later, Trey Millard goes, tore his ACL midway through the season. He was a guy who was doing what he always does for this team, which is a little bit of everything. And it seems like those are two pretty good landing spots, the Broncos for Nelson, the 49ers for Millard, where they can make some impact once they're healthy.
Oh, I think Corey Nelson is healthy. He said, before Pro Day that he was 100%. He was ready. And then he proved that, I thought, by really bench pressing impressively, considering it was a chest injury. So I think that he's probably good to go. Now the question is, can he make the team? I think that it's always tough for seventh round guys. So that he'll sort of be right there. John Elway was had a lot of praise for him when that pick came through. And then as far as Trey Millard goes, I think that's sort of similar to Colvin. I think they could, in some ways, treat this like a redshirt season and let him get healthy. And once he is, we know what kind of player Trey Millard is, how versatile he is. And it'll be really interesting to see what kind of impact he can have in the NFL.
Absolutely. And I said this last week. I think he's a guy who maybe has a bigger impact in the NFL once he's healthy than even he had at the college level.
I think he could, because there's so many things he can do. He can run with the ball. He's obviously a great blocker. He can catch the ball, and he's an impact special teams guy. Despite the fact that that's how his career at OU ended, he enjoys playing special teams. He's good at it. He's very valuable there. And when there's a 53-man roster, you got to be able to do those kinds of things, unless you're one of the superstars. And otherwise, you got to be able to help out in other ways.
Then after the draft, 8 former OU players were picked up as free agents. We got Colton Bester to the Texans, Brennan Clay to the Broncos, Roy Finch to the Patriots, which was an interesting signing for me. Gabe Eichert and Jazz Reynolds signed with Tennessee. Bronson Irwin to the Seahawks, Gabe Lynn to the Lions, and finally Damian Williams to the Dolphins. Jason, who do you think of those guys has the best chance to make a team and the best chance to make a big impact down the road?
I think Gabe Eichert would be a guy that has maybe the best chance to make the team of those 8, just because he was so close to being drafted. I think that he was probably a pretty highly sought free agent, and we know how intelligent he is. We know that he's not going to get in trouble. He's not going to embarrass the team, all of those things. So, and he's going to go in and work really hard. And I'm not saying those other guys aren't, but you sort of know that with him. All of those things combined, I think, makes him the most likely to make the team. I think Roy Finch is landed in a really interesting spot. I think, the way that they used Wes Welker, the way that they use Danny Woodhead, they sort of find a role for guys like that. And Roy Finch is obviously a little smaller than them, but he sort of plays like that. He's just an impact playmaker. And I think that, if things fall the right way, then he really might have a chance to make that team as well.
And then reading some of the stuff coming out of New England after that draft, that signing is there's a thought of why didn't this guy play more, which is obviously a sentiment that we're very familiar with being around OU all the time.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people still wonder that. I still wonder that myself, frankly. This is a guy that when he got in games, more often than not, he did good things. And I think we all know that his junior year, there were some off-the-field things that maybe prevented him from getting more playing time. And you understand that, these coaches are especially take those sorts of things very seriously. And if he wasn't earning time that way, but I think as a senior, there was no indication at all that he was anything but a good teammate as a senior. So I definitely think that that's a question that is interesting, and I think there's a chance that might have cost him, because if he had played more, I don't know if he would have been drafted, but I don't know that he wouldn't have either.
And I'm with you on Eichert being the most likely to make the team out of that group. I really thought that he would be drafted. Was surprised that he fell off the draft board, but you sort of see it with his size and some of the issues that he had at times last year, but you also see the way he works and the success that he's able to have, and that was a bit of a surprise. And certainly the academic stuff away from that has just been unbelievable. But as far as a guy who has a chance to make a long-term impact, I'm going to go with Damian Williams. I think we saw when he was healthy, when he was right, when he was getting stuff done off the field, the production that he was able to have for OU the last couple of years, and certainly an unfortunate ending to his career with some off-the-field issues derailing it. But he's a guy who has all the talent in the world and has the ability to play in the NFL.
Yeah, I think he does, definitely. He's tough. He's physical. He can run between the tackles, but he can also break away, and we saw that a lot his junior year, his ability to make long touchdown runs and 95-yarder in the Texas game. So I definitely think that he might have a chance, but he's going to have to really prove that he can handle the NFL lifestyle. I mean, if he couldn't handle the college lifestyle when he wasn't getting paid a lot of money, I think that might be a question: is how is he going to handle it when he does have a lot of money? And we'll see. I also, another guy I think is Gabe Lynn. I was really surprised that he didn't get more draft buzz. Frankly, I mean, he sort of had a rough first few years on campus, but his senior year was outstanding. He was one of the best players on the defense in many ways, and
he gets overlooked a lot on what he was able to do defensively last year for this team.
Sure, he intercepted passes. He was a big hitter. I think he finally found a home on the defense, and it might have just been too late for him in the process. But I certainly think that he's got a chance, if not in Detroit, to make a team somewhere and make an impact. I really believed, honestly, when the season ended, I sort of thought, just looking at his size and the way he played as a senior, I thought that I could easily see him going in the draft. And then you just never heard anything about him. And then obviously he didn't get picked, and there was just no buzz. And I really was surprised by that.
Absolutely. Well, that's the guys who left OU and are going on in their careers. Now it's time to talk about the guys who are coming into OU. Hopefully they've got some, because it's been a rough recruiting start for the 2015 class. Now we're joined by Soonerscoop.com editor Josh McCuistion. Josh, thanks for joining us today. How you doing?
Doing great, guys. Obviously with spring evaluations and everything going on, it's kind of a busy time in recruiting.
Absolutely. Josh, we saw some of the bounce from the Sugar Bowl from last year. It hasn't really translated into much momentum to the 2015 class, though. What are your overall thoughts on where OU's recruiting is right now?
I'm kind of one of those guys, and I think it's just perpetual with me, but I'm kind of stuck in the middle a little bit. Part of me, I don't think there's any way you can say this is what you thought was going to transpire after that Alabama win, after the Joe Mixon commitment. Oklahoma closed so strong with 2014. You really thought it was going to roll right into 2015, and it kind of looked that way. You had Josh Moraboko, Bobby Evans, Marquise Overton. I mean, you're talking about three top 250 guys in the country, and in Waraboko's case, maybe a top 50 guy in the country. So, I mean, you really looked like there was a lot of momentum. You were hearing good things about guys that weren't committed. It just all seemed to be going right. And then, frankly, it was just about the time when Josh Moraboko decommitted, it seemed like things turned, and it just kind of kept gaining momentum in the wrong direction. I think the thing that gets forgotten, though, kind of to bring the other side of the equation in, is this is going to be a small class for Oklahoma. They can't just blanket out offers like they have in years past and offer guys that maybe they feel like have potential, but they know are kind of a risk. They can't do that because they have to get guys in this class that can help, because there's not those extra scholarships beyond where, okay, if this guy doesn't work out, well, we're going to sign 2 other defensive linemen anyways. Every guy they hit, it needs to be a guy they feel pretty confident can help them and is not so much of a risk, whether it's, he's going to have to change physically or he's got some academic concerns. So when you get a smaller class, there's just less margin for error, and because of that, you also have fewer offers and just a little bit more a diligent offer process. I'm seeing a lot of Oklahoma really making sure they see guys in person. So I think that's slowing things down a little bit too. But again, I don't think there's any way you can say this is where Oklahoma wanted to be at this point, or this is where they thought they would be.
Josh, you say it's going to be a smaller class. I mean, what are you thinking is sort of a max number that would sign this year or in 2015?
I really see a class somewhere around 21 or 22. I mean, you look at the returning numbers, and Oklahoma is going to graduate 17 seniors this year, and honestly, only is going to hit the 85 number thanks to the news last week of Kyle Mars' transfer, and that's going to actually put them at 85 if every single one of their freshmen makes it. Now, there's a few risk guys in there. Orlando Brown is one that's been talked about a lot. So there's still some fluctuation in those numbers. Mm-hmm. But usually, to me, I think it's pretty safe if you'll count on about four guys over the number of seniors that graduate, whether it's transfers or NFL early entrants or whatever the case may be. There's usually about a 4-player swing. So if you assume that, and like I said, 17 seniors will be done after the 2014 season, that leaves you with 21. And again, it can go, it could be 20, it could be 22, but I think you're looking at that low 20s number where the last few years you've seen Oklahoma go over the 25. And you just, I know that seems like a small thing, but when you're talking about 6 or 7 guys, that's a huge number and, frankly, 25% of a large recruiting class.
Josh, you mentioned the Weraboko decommitment, and he said he had his reasons for doing that. Devontae Lampkin comes out and decommits just a few days later. Then last week, OU loses a recruit that they felt really good about from all indications. How much concern is there about those three events, and how much do they all tie together?
To me, Lampkin's the one that's really interesting. I think because you don't quite understand what happened there. With Weraboko, there is certainly a sense that he wants to play with his brother. I don't think that's as locked in as some people do. I think Josh wanted to look around, and I think it was something, I don't want to say an excuse because that's not the right way to say it, but it's something of a rationale for why that could happen, why that needed to happen. And I definitely think he wants to play with his brother. They are very close, and that matters. But with Lampkin, there's not that obvious answer to how did this happen, what took place. He obviously has picked up some new offers, and that plays a role. But I just don't see that overriding factor that makes it so obvious. The guy you mentioned, Jalen Lane from Nacogdoches, who committed to Oklahoma State, which, obviously to anyone watching, it's a double whammy. Not only did you lose him, but you lost him to your arch rival. That only stings all the more. With Lane, he's a guy I actually drove up and saw last Wednesday, did a video interview, and before we could actually run the video interview in which he said, Oklahoma is my number one school, and I really like graduate assistant Chip Viney, I talked to him on Sunday following his Oklahoma State commitment and kind of joked with him, well, maybe OU wasn't number one. And he said, no, they were, but they were recruiting me as a safety, and the only guy I ever talked to was Chip Viney. That's kind of a massive turn, and I don't really understand it to this day how it happened, but it went from Viney was a strength of his recruitment to that was a problem. And from what I've gathered, the safety comments is something that someone has told him, and I don't know that it's entirely accurate, but well, again, with all of those, there are some individual reasons, with the exception of Lampkin. There are things you can kind of wrap your head around. So I don't think it's a widespread issue that's something that Oklahoma's just not doing. And I was very vocal with some of the members of the previous staff that I felt like maybe weren't doing all that they needed to do in this day and age of recruiting to land the top guys. I don't really see that right now. I think this is just something of a run of bad luck and, a little bit of mixture of, maybe some mitigating circumstances that they just can't control. But, again, I think people want to make it into one thing or turn it into some kind of overriding theme, and I don't know that that's fair.
Josh, do you think that that facilities play any role in this? And do you think, with this news that maybe there's going to be some upgrades coming? I mean, do you think those sorts of things help? When you talk to these kids, is that something they talk about?
They do to some degree. Now, the thing that I think is really interesting, and to me that points maybe that facilities are an issue, you don't see that bump for Oklahoma when kids come to campus. You don't see those guys, I really like Oklahoma, and once they leave Norman, I'm committed to Oklahoma. You see that a lot of other places. It happens at Oklahoma State. A perfect example is Ronald Jones. Went up there, really loved it, committed while he was there. You don't see that as much with Oklahoma, and it's more of a elongated process where they really have to get to know the coaches, and the coaches really have to sell. I can't help but wonder if that's not some relationship of guys having an expectation. I mean, Oklahoma, as we all know, a huge program, massively tradition-rich, a massive fan base. And I think sometimes these kids get to campus, and it's not that the facilities are terrible or embarrassing or anything like that. They don't quite match up to what these kids, I think, expect to find. And I think that kind of leads to questions, and maybe there's not that ooh and awe kind of thing that you expect to get. And I do think that's maybe where you could look at it. I very rarely hear kids talk about facilities as a deciding factor, but could it be the thing that pushes you over the edge, the amazing weight room or the new, locker rooms or whatever the case? Yeah, I see these kids retweeting pictures of Alabama and Oregon's facilities all the time. So it definitely plays a role, and to me it's one of those things with Oklahoma and their coaches. It's not that they can't get these guys with these facilities, but they are kind of playing with one hand tied behind their back. And, you kind of want to, as an OU fan, I think you'd have to want to see that change just because, again, there's not that bounce when they hit campus that a lot of other schools see.
One of the things I've gathered, too, about OU is it seems like they don't really put a lot of pressure on kids to commit when they're on campus. And it doesn't seem like that's something Bob Stoops has ever done, and other places may do that. Is that something that they're going to have to change? Are they going to have to rethink the way that they handle these visits and in order to get some more commits, or do you think that they're comfortable with the way they do that?
First, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's something, and it's always something I found really commendable about Oklahoma's recruiting is that they are not the types that are going to try to pressure these kids. There is always going to be some pressure. It's recruiting, there's always some element of that. But by comparison to stories I hear of kids at other schools, there's really no comparison. So I think that's really always been something of a strength for Oklahoma. But I kind of agree with you that there is maybe something fundamentally wrong. There's some reason that this continues to be a problem. And I don't know that you have to go with the hardcore, the Nick Saban sales pitch. But I do think there is something to be said for looking at the way you're doing things. And to me, that's been, I kind of mentioned earlier that some of the previous staff, I felt like there was sometimes a lackadaisical effort. I think that's probably what I've seen the current group do better than anything else is kind of a self-evaluation, looking at what they're doing, looking at things that need to be changed. And it happens a lot more expediently than maybe in years past. And that's recruiting now. I mean, you have to see what the kids like, see what they're reacting to, and you have to make it part of what you do very quickly. I mean, that happens for me as a reporter. I have to kind of stay on top of what's going to help these kids want to talk and kind of have conversations with a guy that frankly brings far less to their future of their lives than these coaches do. So that's just something that you have to be aware of. And I think Oklahoma's doing a better job. But I definitely can't help but wonder if there aren't some conversations of how do we want to handle these kids when they're on campus? Do we want to find some way to kind of turn up the heat, bring up, I don't even know how you do it. I'm not going to say that I have the answer, but there is definitely a question of, is there a way to get it on their mind or get it in the conversation, just how to kind of make commitment seem like a much shorter bridge to cross.
And Josh, you mentioned Chip Viney a little bit ago, and he's a guy who's gotten a lot of attention because of some of the positives that he's brought in recruiting. But obviously that's something as a GA that other schools maybe bring up, either just recruiting you with a GA. You hear people talking about that. Is that sort of a double-edged sword of having a guy like that who is such a big piece of your recruiting puzzle?
I think it absolutely is. I mean, that it goes both ways because, I mean, he's a guy that I hear all the time, and almost invariably it's with guys that Oklahoma either just recently has offered or hasn't offered yet. And I think that's kind of been